Legislations within our zoological collections. Why do we need them? What do they entail, and how many are there? And how do they protect animals? Well, let's find out. Picture this. It's 1965 and you're dreaming of how your furry friends could be more well looked after in captivity. Well, look no further, because you've just been handed the paper stating there's a new 5 freedoms being introduced. Zoos were intended to help with scientific research, but needed funding, so therefore opened to the public in 1847. The first zoo to do this was London Zoo, and since many have opened to fund with conservation, research and education, including Camperdown. Although a brand new attraction to the public and overall a new way of keeping animals, especially exotic, they were not perfect. Therefore, after some time it took a while to be enforced anywhere, or what we now call legislations. The first rules were approved of in 1965, which you just saw, which stated that animals should be able to stand up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs, called Bramble's 5 Freedoms. This was in response from Ruth Harrison's book Animal Machines that caused a public concern of welfare of captive animals. In future they were updated. These were a lot more defined and made sure an animal's care was specified towards them. They're essentially a blueprint towards every other legislation made in future, as they're all based off of the original 5. Freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from fear and distress, freedom to express normal behaviour, freedom from discomfort, and freedom from injury, pain, or disease. The Dangerous Wild Animal Act, 1976. The DWA Act is enforced to stop anyone owning a wild animal if they do not have a licence and make sure that any person keeping one creates no risk to the public. Animals included are things like your crocs, gazelles, primates, elephants, and giant anteaters. It's 1981, the decade where the best music was introduced. You got Tears for Fears, Wham, Duran Duran, anything. The rise and craze for these bad boys, which I still can't figure out. In a decade for the best music. But you're not here for that. You're here to learn about zoo animals. The yellow-footed honeygide was introduced and the pineapple rattail was discovered. And also, 20 years into the future, there was a brand new zoo legislation that was introduced. Basically meant that any zoo open to the public for more than 7 days a year had to hold a licence. It didn't include pet shops or circuses though. And it also meant that standards went up. Let me show you. Before his licence can be granted to a collection, an inspector must come in to see if they're up to standard with their animal keeping. This gave zoos a chance to step up their housing game and improve their current environments. It also ensures zoos are providing education and awareness to the public, up-to-date welfare, make sure they have enough keeping staff, exit and entry points, this is for fires and potential escapes, and that safety is clearly a top priority. A zoo can be fined up to £2,500 if they do not have a licence and haven't applied for one. Organisations that are on board with zoos. BIAZA, British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Founded in 1966, they have over 100 members from across Britain and Ireland. They focus on conservation and they manage breeding programmes and provide support for habitat management. More than 800 projects go out every year. WAZA, World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Over 400 members around the world. They cooperate with zoos, wildlife experts, and all the way to academies and universities. DEFRA, Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Discharge policy on environment, food and rural issues, keeps marine countryside and biodiversity safe and protected, and supports growth of greener projects. IAZA, European Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Supports help with keeping animals at a healthy population while in captivity, while seeing to that they are safeguard the genetic health of the animals under their attention. Good versus bad welfare. We all want to see animals thriving in a captive environment, even though it's not entirely natural. But it's important we understand the difference between the good and the bad welfare within our animals. Welfare can have a significant impact on an animal. Good welfare means that an animal can thrive and be healthy, and bad welfare means that they can become depressed and unhappy. So, it's important that we can provide the positive. The importance of the bad. Although it sounds harsh, it's important that past collections have displayed not so good environments, because we can learn from these and further improve over time and learn from other collections' mistakes. In the past, animals have been kept in concrete holes, boxes with a teensy bit of bedding, and cages no bigger than themselves. Examples seen are a lack of curiosity within enclosures, bad condition of the animal itself because of lack of care, Abnormal behaviour, so things like pacing, overgrooming to the point of harming oneself, and not having access to clean food or water, and sleeping either too often or too little. Good welfare. What we all want to see. Spacious enclosures with lots of entertainment involved, like toys, natural mimicking of its wild environment. If it needs to live in another of its kind, it is. A proper diet that keeps the animal healthy and happy. Shelter and hiding spots if it ever needs time alone, and regular health checks. What we need to look for in the Kias. Healthcare is important to do so regularly, as animals are quite good at hiding illnesses that can make them look weak and get them kicked out of a social group. It's also important, as if it's contagious, can seriously affect a flock/herd, etc. What we want to see. We would like to see in our Kias interaction with their environment, plenty of social behaviour, a healthy, full coat of feathers. In Camperdown, Kuba, the most distinguishable one of the group, looks a little rough. This is because of a behavioural feather plucking issue he has, due to being hand-reared. He is currently on medication for this. Work experience. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3, Day 4, Day 5. Safety. So one thing zoos and keepers prioritise is obviously the safety of their animals and the people that come to visit their zoos. Judging by their impossible locks that are all around the place, I've called so many times I genuinely can't. This is horrible. Genuinely, for the life of me, I couldn't open that door. So the first day I went around to Collection K, I was on the gate with her and we started unlocking the emergency exits and indoor gates, basically gates that separate areas from the inside of the zoo. While we did this, we also checked that all the Class A animals are still contained, like the bears, lynx, anteaters, etc. Feeding. Then, if not made up previously the night before, start on the feeds. It's very important that each animal has a meal suited to them, whether this includes age, allergies, illness, for example now with diabetes, size or any other factors. We just have to take care. Diet differences. Here we have an example. We have the Amherst leopard cat fed on a carnivorous diet consisting of salmon, chicks and mice and many more, compared to the sun conure, who gets a variety of different fruits and veg cut very small so it's easier for them to eat. Checkups. Because these zoo animals are wild, it's rather difficult to perform checkups on them. That's why it's so important for keepers to constantly work with the same animals, as they're able to sense and see any changes, whether that be with behaviour or the way they're looking. It's also a top priority to give meds, injections and surgery when needed, so zoos always have a vet on speed dial for those occasions. But how do we allow this to happen without stressing the animal out? That's where training comes in. Training animals to do simple tasks and rewarding for it is a great way to teach calm behaviour when something unusual to the animal is happening. Nala, the anteater who has diabetes, has been trained to go into what is called a crush cage, which is a small cage they're only in for a short amount of time to receive things like medication, in Nala's case for insulin doses. Other examples include training the hornbills to stay in one place while Hannah, one of the keepers at Camperdown, moves around the enclosure. This is so they aren't startled by sudden movements and potentially becoming aggressive. Entertainment. Keepers also have a very important job of keeping animals entertained throughout their lives at the zoos. Having an enclosure that keeps an animal safe, giving them a bed and feeding them is great, but it's the environment that they're surrounded by that also counts. Environmental enrichment includes foliage, perches, platforms, substrates, heaters and coolers, and the overall look and feel of the place, obviously for the animal's sake. General enrichment is things like toys, sensory like scent, sound, taste and touch. Including this prevents boredom and stress that can lead to behavioural issues like overgrooming, bar biting and licking like we discussed before. In conclusion, keepers are extremely important because if we didn't have keepers, we wouldn't have zoos. In a nutshell, this is basically what I found out when I was researching their Kias. Number 1, they're omnivorous. This means they eat plant and animal material. They eat seeds, fruit, insect, flowers, Although they do eat seeds, their fruit can't be seeded, so when they're being fed it has to be taken out. They eat cicada nymphs, grasshoppers, snails, rabbit, and they're most known for attacking livestock in New Zealand. Back in the 1980s, Kias were attacking farmers' sheep so often that farmers started shooting them on sight. Therefore, they had to be put under the Wildlife Act because their numbers started slowly decreasing, that they became uncommon. And now, since then, their numbers have slowly been increasing back again. Obviously, it's impossible to try and recreate every feeding technique that an animal does in the wild while they're in captivity. For example, we can't just chuck a gazelle in with a bunch of lions and see what they do. Same with the sheep and the Kias, we can't just put a sheep into their enclosure and see how they kill it. It's not possible and it's completely unethical. Therefore, staff and keepers have to try and find ways to recreate these kind of processes without using the real thing. For example, so these are some of the things that I saw while I was in Camperdown observing. So as you can see, there is an information board right outside their enclosure, and it basically tells you where they come from, their habitat, and their characteristics, and a little fact file, and where they are on the red list. But what about their feeding? What does that entail? What do they actually eat? It doesn't say on here, but let's find out. So what you're actually seeing here is an enrichment technique that was made by the keepers and one of my classmates while they were on work experience. It's basically a little parcel of food wrapped in newspaper, so the Kias can actually use their beaks and start tearing at it and ripping it apart and trying to see what's inside. It was filled with walnuts and then mealworms and also just through pellet feed in general. So what you're seeing here is basically a perfect example of mimicking what they would do in the wild. These Kias are still allowed to rip apart things and use their natural instinct to do so, without having to use the real thing and just using newspaper and treats. Obviously it's going to be extremely difficult for the keepers to get around to the Kias every day at the same time. Therefore, I concluded, over the times I was watching them, that they're fed between the hours of 9 AM and 11 AM. In the morning, they get sweet potato, pepper, carrot, celery, broccoli, sweet corn, parsnip, whatever you can think of, and fruits like bananas, apples, pears, raspberries, melon, but de-seeded, as well as the plum, has no stone in it because they obviously can't eat the seeds. In the afternoon, they get their pellet tub of enrichment, and their nuts, seeds, mealworms, spinach, kale, and Chinese leaf. Their diet is basically the exact same as it would be in the wild than it is in captivity. Apart from the meat factor, they're strictly fed herbivorous here. They don't get any deer, rabbit, or sheep, but apart from that, it's basically the exact same. This giraffe here comes from all the way down in South Africa and is home to 37,000 more. 1,379 giraffes are kept in captivity around the world, and a lot of the enclosures simply don't mirror nearly enough of their natural habitat as they should do. Here are some of the consequences of that. This video, however very old, it is a very good example of next to in giraffes. It's also seen in primates, bears and llamas as well, which I'll show you. It's caused by artificial environments that do not meet the natural needs of an animal, interfering with their natural pattern, especially if the animal enclosed used to be wild. Another example here is bar biting and sucking, and repetitive licking and grooming of one another. There are many reasons that come with bar biting, but a lot of it is due to small spaces, boredom and even stress. Here are 3 captive otters at Dundee's very own Camperdown Wildlife Centre. Originally born in the wild, they were taken in as 2 of them were showing signs of blindness and physically would not be able to fend for themselves and would eventually die off if uncaptured. Now, the keeper uniform at Camperdown consists mainly of the colour navy, from the jumper and the jackets to even the boiler suits. Because that's the colour they see when they're getting fed, they assume that every time someone walks past them with that particular colour on, they're getting food. An example here is when I went up to say hello, I made the mistake of dressing exactly like a keeper. A mistake I seem to have made in the past before, causing a member of the public to ask me questions about the feeding times of some of the animals. Then they start to squeak and climb the bars, and once they realise they're not getting anything, they wander off. So this basically means navy blue equals feeding time. What is hand rearing and how can it affect an animal's behaviour, especially towards humans and their cognitive pattern? If an animal has been raised in a captive environment with no real link to the outside world and its potential danger, how can it survive out in the wild? In most cases, with hand rearing and training, they can't. This is due to being so familiar with human interaction. It's not the best course if you want an animal to be released back into the wild, but sometimes it is essential for an animal's survival. For example, a mother elephant dying during birth, the calf has no food source, and someone will eventually have to step in. That is one of the more positive examples because the animal is surviving thanks to us, but in some cases it can affect an animal entirely. Behavioural effects are a big one for hand rearing. See the unique looking Kia we talked about before, Kuba? Let's dive a little deeper into his past. The story I got was when Kuba was just a chick, he was hand reared in the Netherlands, then moved to Germany, then all the way to the Czech Republic, and finally made his final stop at Camperdown a few years ago. So he has done a bit of travelling over the years, about 16 or 17. Because of this, he has a habit to feather pluck, giving him that rough appearance of balding. Hand feeding already dead animals to animals leaves them no room to learn about hunting and foraging for themselves. It is against the law to feed any live animals to residents, so keepers make the most of what they have and make up toys to make animals really work for their food to try and mimic that natural instinct. Here we have an example of Oz at Camperdown pulling out a bird from up on his platform, switching it up from just laying it on one of them. These 3 ethograms will go over how the group of Kia's behaviour changed over the months of winter to springtime, and see how differently they contrast from one another. At the bottom of each, I also took some extra notes to see if anything popped up that was interesting or unusual. What I found out. January 17th, 2024. First of all, I made up with the ethogram itself, consisting of 6 columns split into 9 5-minute intervals. The categories were foraging, eating, excretion, grooming, sleeping and resting, and social behaviour. So coming up to the bars to interact with visitors or each other. Findings. As there was 4 of them, they did a lot that was rather difficult to keep track of, so therefore I wrote on the sheet not how many times they did something, but rather how many of the group was doing an activity within one of the 5-minute periods. For example, in this first ethogram, 35 minutes in, they were all either sleeping or resting, so that means 4 tally marks. So what I found from this one ethogram was that they didn't do a lot of eating that was seen, either because they were inside or the fact that I had visited them too early in the morning to the point where they weren't fed or fully awake. Also due to the fact it was too cold and snowing that day, so most of them were inside getting warm. I did notice, however, when you went up to the fence or were at their enclosure for a long period of time, the birds would come up to the fence wanting either attention and to keep an eye on you to see if you had any treats on you. This was a common occurrence with Zombie, as I felt he was the most active throughout the 45-minute periods with social behaviour. February 21st, 2024. They were mostly seen grooming, sleeping and resting during this time, and also displaying social behaviours. The grooming was mostly Cuba, because of his plucking habits, and I must have came at the right time because they were eating foods. I did come around 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon at this point, therefore that must be the time where they're most active because they know they are getting fed. That will explain why a lot of them came up to the fence when I came along, to ensure that maybe I had some food on me that I was going to try feed them. March 6th, 2024. A short ethogram because of the weather, so it only lasted about 20 minutes, and most of the group started to head into their indoor bit. A lot of sleeping and resting on their behalf, on branches, and not a lot of social behaviours, so less came up to the fence as they want to get away from the rain. So I conclude from this one, they don't like the rain and therefore are less active and they head inside, therefore that's why it was so short, because by the time the 20 minutes came around, they were all inside and they had no signs of coming back out. Sheets. This section will go over how Camperdown assists the animals' welfare through their welfare sheets and examining each point to see what they could improve on and what's already good enough. So on the top here you've got the purpose of the sheet, and it's to find out what is already in place within the enclosure that relates to the physical and cognitive growth of the species and what may need to be updated in terms of dietary, enrichment and husbandry. From this, a plan will be drawn up to achieve goals noted from this inspection, and it's also for the future importance of welfare standards and what effect this will have on programmes surrounding the subject. Moving on further down the sheet, we've got just the things I've noted that's in their enclosure, and just, your practical standard welfare practices,
and what I see in the enclosure and what I think could be added and improved. For example, the second point here, the hiding areas, I've seen that there is a large bush that behind sits a perch away from public view. Also the indoor area, there's like a big bush in front, and right behind that there's a log that Kuba likes to sit on, so like he's away, hiding away from the public. And what I think could be added or improved is possibly more bird boxes around the enclosure, particularly in the back, as the left area isn't quite bare. Moving on, we have things like your perches, outdoor shelter, and things like toys. I do believe there should be more cognitive enrichment aspects added in there. I did notice there was a few lying about in the enclosure, but there's always room for more. This would really show their true cognitive potential, as they do show it, but I think we could see more of it. Just some other basics as well, like mimicking their environment is done pretty splendidly and pleasing to look at. Also security, like what door system they use and how they stop them from escaping and other things entering. Down here we have dietary aspects and how they adhere to that. So we've got our feeding times and their routines, dietary sheets, mimicking of natural feeding behaviours, diet type, enrichment strategies feeding wise, and water access within the enclosure. From what I thought this was all pretty good. Apart from possibly their diet type, in the wild they are sort of omnivorous, but I mostly see them in campground get fed on a herbivorous diet. So I'd like to see that sort of implemented into their diet, but apart from that it was pretty good. Making an enrichment project. The building process. So I picked to build them what is called a wobble board, and I did that by attaching a tub and half a coconut, and basically mixed that all together, and here we have a wobble board. On top is a layer of wood with a hole cut into it, so basically it dispenses treats out the sides, because I know Kias are very smart, although very destructive, so I did make it as safe as possible for them. I went through a lot of planning for it and even thought of 2 different other projects that I thought wouldn't display enough thinking, as I know they can do, therefore that's why I changed it. The wobble board is so they can work together to try and get the treats out, and to see if they would know how to take it apart in the end, pulling off the zip ties and tearing the board up. They didn't do that in the end, which I thought was quite surprising, so either I made it too difficult for them, or they just got bored, who knows. I was hoping they'd be able to figure it out after a few attempts by tipping the board in different directions, and they would know that would get the treats out instead of just trying to fit their head in the box. They did do that in the end, and did figure out that flipping and tipping and moving the box was getting the food out better. So right here is when I put the enrichment into the enclosure. I was here with one of the keepers, and I just wanted to see what they would do with it. I filled it up with, I think, walnuts and peanuts, and I was trying to see if they would be able to figure it out. They actually did, so they were chucking it about. I'm pretty sure Zombie hit Numa in the head with it, which was rather entertaining to see, and they managed to get all the treats out. They didn't rip it apart like I thought they would, which I explained before, but I do think they really liked it in the end, so there's a plus.
What is this? I think I found them. Oh, wait a minute, I found the hole again. Oh, let's see the treats.
I'm not going to mute this video on my documentary, I hope you know that.
I think the project went really well. They really enjoyed trying to take it apart. Even Kuba had a go of it, which I thought was really, really excellent, as he's normally very shy. So to see him come out of his shell and try it, I thought was really exciting. Zombie and Numa were just getting the treats out rather than eating them, so Iris had fun just taking them and making her own little pile and eating them, which I thought was quite funny. One thing that I would change about it is that originally, to keep the lid on the box, I used 4 small screws, but last minute advised myself to change them to something else to avoid any injury. Before the macaws have had surgery because they've swallowed screws before, so I checked with the keepers last minute to see if I should change it, and they advised that I did. So I did, so I think next time I would just instantly think to use zip ties instead of screws, just to, avoid any last minute changes. Results time, let's see how they liked it through an ethogram and not just opinionated perspective. So let's see how they did. So here we have the final ethogram of May 8th, 2024. Now she's definitely not the prettiest looking ethogram. I was working on my knee, the floor and someone else's back, so we're dealing with what we're working with, okay? So for this particular ethogram, I added an extra column called Enrichment Interaction. This was just to note down how many of them were interacting with it in the 5-minute marks. I saw a lot more interaction socially between the birds and towards humans. All of them were out at one point, either up at the bars or trying at the board. I even saw that they were working together as a team at one point to see what they could do with the board and helping each other lift it, which I've never really seen them do, so I think it brought out a natural group behaviours, which is great to see. Kubo only came out at the 20-minute mark and stayed on the fence out of sight. On the near the end he did come out and try the board himself, and he did go away when the others came and joined him, but he seemed to join back in a while later, which was also really nice to see. I would like to thank everyone for watching this far. I'm actually very proud of what I did with this documentary, and I really hope you enjoyed.